The sterile silence of the courtroom was a universe away from the life Carolyn Hayes once knew. Across the polished room, her husband Richard sat with his lawyer, a portrait of unearned confidence. But it wasn't him that held the room's attention. It was the woman beside him, Jessica Monroe. She had made a spectacle of her arrival, a deliberate performance of victory. On her arm she carried the prize, a shockingly green alligator handbag, a beacon of wealth and defiance. It was a message, a declaration of war sent directly to Caroline. Jessica smirked, believing she had already won. She believed the bag was her crown. What she didn't know was that in this quiet, solemn room, Caroline wasn't there to fight over a man. She was there to reclaim her life, and the key to it all was sitting right there on Jessica's lap. Life in the penthouse on Park Avenue was curated to perfection. From the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Manhattan skyline, like a living masterpiece, to the carefully selected abstract art that adorned the walls, everything in Caroline and Richard Hayes's home spoke of success, power, and impeccable taste. For 15 years, Carolyn had been the silent architect of this perfection. She had managed their social calendar with the precision of a military strategist, hosted dinners that could make or break careers, and cultivated an aura of serene elegance that was the envy of their circle. Their life was a well-oiled machine gleaming on the surface, but deep within its gears, a corrosive rust had begun to spread. The change in Richard had been insidious, a slow cooling of a star. The shared laughter that once echoed in their cavernous living room had faded into polite, hollow inquiries about each other's day. His business trips became more frequent, his nights at the office longer. He brought home the scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, a floral, cloying fragrance that clung to the wool of his suits. At first, Carolyn had allowed herself the comfort of denial. They were busy. They were under stress. This was just a phase for a couple navigating their late 40s. But Caroline was an accountant by trade. Her mind was a fortress of logic, and numbers a place where loose ends were anathema. She saw life in patterns in debits and credits, and the balance sheet of her marriage was catastrophically off. The first concrete anomaly appeared on the platinum card statement, a charge from a boutique hotel in Soho called the Mercer. Richard had told her he was at a tech conference in Boston that weekend. She cross-referenced the dates. They matched. It was a small thing, easily explained away, a mistaken charge, perhaps, but it was a crack in the foundation, and Carolyn couldn't stop herself from peering through. She began to look not with the frantic desperation of a scorned wife, but with the methodical patience of an auditor. She started a private spreadsheet, a secret ledger of her husband's life. A charge for $200 at a French bistro in the West Village on a Tuesday. He claimed to be in a board meeting until midnight. A recurring monthly payment to a high-end floral service she had never heard of with delivery notes to a downtown address. Receipts from luxury retailers like Cartier and Van Cleef and Arpels for items she had never received tucked away in the pocket of a forgotten blazer. Each discovery was a small, cold stone dropped into her stomach. She didn't cry. The pain was too sharp, too precise for tears. It was an intellectual agony, the horror of realizing the equation you've dedicated your life to was built on a false variable. He was not just cheating. He was building an entirely separate life, funded by their shared empire. The love and trust she had invested for a decade and a half were being liquidated to fund a fantasy with someone else. The name, when she finally found it, felt both mundane and monumental. Jessica Monroe. It was on a digital receipt emailed to their shared home account, an oversight of breathtaking arrogance on Richard's part. It was a confirmation for a private suite at a 5-star resort in St. Bart's. Richard Hayes and Jessica Monroe. The trip was scheduled for their 16th wedding anniversary. Caroline stared at the screen, the glowing pixels forming a death sentence for her marriage. She remembered planning a quiet dinner for their anniversary, even buying a bottle of the vintage Bordeaux Richard loved. The naivety of it made her feel sick. In that moment, sitting in the quiet of her marble-clad home office, surrounded by the trappings of a life she now saw as a complete fabrication, the hurt finally receded, replaced by a crystalline, chilling clarity. Richard had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had mistaken her trust for blindness. He thought their life was his gilded cage to which he held the only key. He had forgotten one crucial detail. She was the one who had helped him build it, and she knew exactly where all the structural weaknesses were. The spreadsheet was no longer just a log of suspicions. It was a blueprint for demolition. The confrontation didn't happen in a tempest of slammed doors and screamed accusations. That wasn't Caroline's style. She waited until the following Sunday morning, a time that had once been reserved for lazy brunches and the thick rustle of the New York Times. Richard was sitting in his favorite leather armchair, a cup of coffee in one hand, a tablet in the other, scrolling through market reports. The sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, a serene domestic scene that was about to be shattered. "Richard," Caroline said, her voice even and calm. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The quiet authority in her tone made him look up, a flicker of irritation in his eyes at being disturbed. She placed a single sheet of paper on the polished mahogany table beside him. It was the hotel confirmation for St. Bart's. "I believe you made a mistake and sent this to the wrong email address," she said. Richard glanced at the paper. For a fraction of a second, his carefully constructed composure cracked. A flash of pure panic widened his eyes before the mask slammed back into place. He leaned back, affecting an air of nonchalant confusion. "What is this junk mail, I assume? They send these things out all the time." "It has your name on it, Richard." "And hers." Jessica Monroe. Caroline stood her ground, her posture unwavering. Is she the one who smells of gardenias? The gaslighting came next, as predictable as the sunrise. "Caroline, what are you talking about? Are you feeling all right? You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." He tried to turn it around, to paint her as unstable paranoid. It was a classic cruel maneuver she had read about, but never imagined would be deployed against her. She let him finish her expression unreadable. When he was done, she placed a second piece of paper on the table. It was a printout of the Cartier receipt. Then a third, the bill from the French bistro. Then a fourth and a fifth. She laid them out like a losing hand of cards, a neat row of his betrayals. "This is from the weekend you were in Boston. This is for the necklace I never received. And this is a list of 12 other discrepancies from the last 6 months alone." The blood drained from Richard's face. His feigned concern curdled into cold fury. He saw the spreadsheet, the columns, the dates, the cold, hard data of his affair. He was trapped not by hysterics, but by facts. The suave, powerful man who could charm a boardroom into submission was rendered speechless by his wife's quiet competence. "So you've been spying on me," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. The pretense was over. "Going through my things like a common thief." "I was auditing our life," she replied, her voice still unnervingly steady. "And I found a significant and unauthorized expenditure of assets. Our assets, Richard." The arrogance returned, then swelling to fill the void left by his shock. He stood up, towering over her, a pathetic attempt to intimidate. "Fine," he spat. "You want to know? Yes. Her name is Jessica, And she's vibrant and fun, and she makes me feel alive. Something you haven't done in a decade." The words were meant to gut her, to shred what was left of her self-worth. And they hurt, of course they hurt. They were tiny, poisoned darts. But Caroline had already moved past the pain. She was in the realm of logistics now. "I see," she said simply. His cruelty escalated. "I want a divorce, Caroline. It's over. I'll have my lawyer draw up a proposal. I'll be generous, of course. You'll be well taken care of. You can keep the apartment, find a hobby, take up gardening. Just sign the papers, and we can all move on with our lives." He delivered the lines as if he were firing a subordinate, a swift, clean severance package. He expected her to crumble, to dissolve into tears, to accept the gilded cage he was offering her in exchange for her silence and a quick exit. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had been married to for 15 years. He saw her as a decorative accessory to his life, not the partner who had balanced their books, managed their investments, and possessed an intellect that was every bit as sharp as his own. Caroline looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time she felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. He was a cliché, a wealthy man in a midlife crisis, trading a diamond for a piece of glass because it sparkled more brightly under artificial light. "No," she said. The single word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Richard blinked. "No. What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, I will not accept your generous offer. I will not be taken care of. And I will not be signing anything your lawyer drafts." She stated her gaze as hard as steel. "You have systematically funneled marital assets into your affair. That is not just immoral, it is illegal. So no, Richard. I will not go quietly." She turned and walked towards her office. "I'll see you in court, and I suggest you hire the best lawyer you can afford. You're going to need him." He stared after her, his mouth slightly agape, the full force of his miscalculation finally dawning on him. The quiet, predictable woman he had so carelessly discarded had just declared war. Caroline's choice of lawyer was as deliberate and calculated as her spreadsheet. She didn't go to one of the old guard, silver-haired sharks Richard would have expected. Instead, she chose David Chen, a younger, sharper attorney, known for his forensic approach to financial settlements. His office was minimalist and modern, a reflection of his own no-nonsense demeanor. When Caroline laid out her evidence on his glass conference table, the spreadsheet, the printed statements, the screenshots all neatly organized in a black binder, Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the only sign of his surprise. "Mrs. Hayes," he said after a long moment of silence, looking up from the meticulous records. "This is comprehensive. Most of my clients come in with tears and suspicions. You've come in with a prosecution-ready case for financial malfeasance. I don't want his apologies, Mr. Chen." Caroline stated, her hands folded calmly on the table. "I don't want revenge. I want what I am owed. My half of the life I helped build, not what's left after he's finished siphoning it off." "I understand completely," Chen replied, a newfound respect in his eyes. "We will file immediately, and we will petition for a full forensic audit of all your shared accounts and his personal businesses for the last 5 years." The war began. Richard, true to Caroline's prediction, hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer from a powerhouse firm, a man named Arthur Vance, who specialized in slash-and-burn tactics. Their opening salvo was an attempt to paint Caroline as a greedy, embittered housewife, disconnected from the realities of the business world Richard inhabited. They argued that the wealth was his creation alone, and she was merely a beneficiary. It was a foolish strategy, and Mr. Chen dismantled it with surgical precision, presenting evidence of Caroline's own financial acumen. including a portfolio of personal investments she had managed that had outperformed Richard's own over the past decade. The battle lines were drawn not over emotion, but over numbers. Meanwhile, Jessica Monroe, no longer a secret, launched her own offensive on a different front: social media. It was a campaign of psychological warfare. Her Instagram profile, previously private, was suddenly unlocked for the world to see. It became a curated gallery of her life, with Richard a life paid for by Caroline's marital assets. There were pictures of them clinking champagne glasses on a private jet. Richard's arm wrapped possessively around her. Photos from the balcony of a five-star hotel in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, twinkling in the background. A video of her wrist adorned with the Cartier bracelet Caroline had found the receipt for. Each post was a carefully aimed dart, captioned with nauseatingly smug hashtags, "Living my best life, true love, he knows my worth." Caroline refused to look at it, instructing Mr. Chen's paralegal to monitor the account and archive everything. But the whispers of their social circle reached her tales of Jessica's brazenness. She was taunting Caroline, trying to provoke a reaction, to paint her as jealous and unhinged. Then came the handbag. It appeared on Jessica's Instagram feed on a Tuesday afternoon. The photo was a close-up, a selfie of sorts, but the focus wasn't her face. It was the bag she was holding. It was an Hermes Birkin, 30, but not just any Birkin. It was crafted from alligator leather in a rare, vibrant shade of green called vert criquet, finished with gleaming palladium hardware. It was a bag that screamed not just wealth, but access and exclusivity. A bag that could cost more than a luxury car with a waiting list years long, unless you were important enough to bypass it. The caption was the final twist of the knife. Some women get the world, others just get by. So grateful for a man who knows the difference. Blessed luxury life unapologetic. When the paralegal showed Caroline the screenshot, it was the first time she felt a genuine hot surge of anger. It wasn't about the bag's monetary value. It was the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. The bag was a trophy. Jessica was parading it as a symbol of her victory, proof that she had replaced Caroline, that she was more valuable, more desired. It was a vulgar distillation of everything the affair represented: the transactional nature of her relationship with Richard, the flagrant dissipation of shared funds, and the profound disrespect for 15 years of marriage. She looked at the image, at the perfect, almost luminous green scales of the bag, at the smug curve of Jessica's lips, just visible in the corner of the frame. "Save this one, please," Caroline said to the paralegal, her voice dangerously quiet. "Print it in high resolution." Mr. Vance argues that Mr. Hayes's spending on Ms. Monroe consists of minor tokens of affection. I believe a $150,000 handbag might challenge that definition. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this bag, this garish symbol of Jessica's triumph, would become her undoing. Pride, as the saying went, goeth before a fall, and Jessica Monroe was practically sprinting towards the cliff's edge. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room in Arthur Vance's law office. It was a space designed to be intimidating, with a long, dark wood table, imposing leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed to mock anyone with a smaller net worth. Jessica Monroe arrived 20 minutes late, an entrance clearly designed to project an air of nonchalant importance. She was dressed in a tight white designer dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. She looked less like a witness and more like a reality television star arriving for a reunion special. She took her seat opposite David Chen, next to a smirking Richard and his bulldog of a lawyer. Caroline was there, seated next to Chen, her presence quiet but unyielding. She had insisted on attending. She wanted to see the woman who had dismantled her life, not on a curated Instagram feed, but under the flat, unforgiving light of legal scrutiny. Jessica's performance began the moment she was sworn in. She was coached, that much was obvious. Her answers were short, vague, and delivered with a dismissive little sigh, as if the entire proceeding was a tedious interruption to her fabulous life. Ms. Monroe. Mr. Chen began, his tone polite but firm. Can you please describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Richard Hayes? We're very close, Jessica said, tossing her hair. He's a dear friend. A dear friend, Chen repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Is it customary for your dear friends to purchase you apartments in Tribeca? Vance immediately jumped in. Objection. Relevance. It's highly relevant to the dissipation of marital assets, counsel, Chen shot back without missing a beat. Overruled, he muttered to himself before turning back to Jessica. Please answer the question, Miss Monroe. Jessica flicked a glance at Richard. Richard is a very generous man. He helps out his friends. I see. And this generosity? Chen continued, picking up a file. Does it extend to a monthly allowance of $20,000 wired from a corporate account belonging to Hayes Development? I do some consulting for him. Jessica stammered, her confidence wavering for the first time. Styling, brand advice. Whoa. Do you have a registered business, Ms. Monroe Invoices? A portfolio of this work? It's more of a freelance arrangement, she said evasively, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding Caroline's steady gaze. For an hour, Chen chipped away at her carefully constructed facade. He questioned her about the cars, the jewelry, the lavish trips. With each question, Jessica's answers grew more convoluted. She was a brand ambassador for a company Richard secretly owned. She was a muse for a design project. She was an investment in a future venture. The lies were flimsy, transparent, and utterly insulting in their lack of sophistication. She was so accustomed to people being dazzled by the shine of Richard's money that she seemed to believe it made her explanations plausible. Throughout the deposition, Caroline remained silent, a statue of composure. She watched Jessica not with hatred, but with a kind of clinical fascination. This was the woman Richard had risked everything for, a woman whose entire identity was built on things that could be bought, things that could be taken away. There was no depth, no substance, just a grasping, desperate need for validation through luxury goods. She felt an unexpected wave of emptiness for Richard, for the hollowness he must have felt to seek solace in someone so profoundly superficial. The deposition was nearing its end when Chen finally brought up the bag. He slid a high-resolution printout of the Instagram post across the table. Ms. Monroe, do you recognize this photograph? Jessica beamed, her confidence flooding back. This was her home turf. Of course, it's from my Instagram. And the handbag featured prominently in the photo. An Hermes Birkin. Is that correct? A Vert Criquet, alligator, Birkin 30. She corrected him, her voice dripping with pride, as if naming it was an accomplishment in itself. It's a very rare piece. And a very expensive one, Chen added smoothly. Was this also a gift from your dear friend, Mr. Hayes? It was, she said, preening, a token of his affection. He appreciates fine things. She shot a venomous glance at Caroline, a silent message. This is what a woman of value receives. Caroline met her gaze without flinching. She held it until Jessica, unnerved by the lack of a reaction, looked away first. Thank you, Miss Monroe, Mr. Chen said, gathering his papers. No further questions, for now. As they packed their briefcases, Richard leaned over to Jessica, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh, a loud, grating sound that echoed in the quiet room. They were convinced they had won the day. Jessica had stuck to the script, portraying herself as a doted-upon friend, a consultant, anything but a mistress whose entire lifestyle was funded by marital money. They believed her arrogance was a shield. They had no idea that Mr. Chen, with Carolyn's guidance, had just handed her the sword she would soon fall upon. The day of the divorce hearing arrived under a steel-gray New York sky. The family courthouse on Lafayette Street was a solemn, imposing building, its halls echoing with the quiet tragedies of fractured lives. Caroline arrived early with Mr. Chen, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit. Her demeanor was calm, her face betraying none of the turmoil that had defined her past year. She was not there as a victim. She was there as the CEO of her own liberation. Richard and his lawyer Arthur Vance were already seated, whispering conspiratorially. Richard looked impeccable in a tailored suit, the picture of a man in control. He exuded an aura of wealth and power that he thought made him invincible even here. He caught Caroline's eye and gave a small, condescending nod, as if acknowledging a junior employee. Caroline simply looked through him. The proceedings began, and the courtroom settled into a monotonous rhythm of legal arguments. Vance was making his case, arguing that the division of assets should heavily favor Richard. He painted a picture of his client as a financial genius, the sole architect of their fortune, while Caroline was relegated to the role of a passive beneficiary. Mr. Chen calmly refuted each point with bank statements, investment reports, and tax returns that proved Carolyn's active and significant role in managing and growing their wealth. It was then that the courtroom doors swung open, breaking the solemn atmosphere. Jessica Monroe made her entrance. It was a masterpiece of calculated drama. She was 20 minutes late, ensuring all eyes would be on her. She was dressed in a vibrant fuchsia dress that was entirely inappropriate for the somber setting. Her heels clicked loudly on the marble floor, a percussive announcement of her arrival. And on her arm, held high like a royal scepter, was the vert criquet alligator Birkin. A ripple of murmurs went through the small public gallery. She wasn't just attending. She was making a statement. She was a walking, talking billboard of Richard's affair, a living embodiment of the assets in dispute. She glided to a seat directly behind Richard, placing the bag conspicuously on her lap, its brilliant green, a defiant splash of color in the muted room. She met Caroline's gaze and offered a slow, triumphant smirk. See, the look screamed, "I'm here. I'm real. He chooses me. I have the prize." It was a power move of such breathtaking arrogance that even the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed, paused and peered over her spectacles at the disruption. Caroline, however, remained impassive. She had anticipated this. She had counted on Jessica's vanity, on her desperate need to flaunt her perceived victory. To Jessica's visible frustration, Caroline offered no reaction at all. She didn't glare. She didn't cry. She didn't even acknowledge her presence. She simply turned her attention back to the judge as if a brightly colored insect had briefly flown into her line of sight before becoming irrelevant. This lack of engagement seemed to infuriate Jessica more than any emotional outburst could have. Vance was in the middle of dismissing Richard's expenditures on Jessica. "These were personal gifts Your Honor made from Mr. Hayes's personal income after the couple had already effectively separated. They have no bearing on the marital estate." "Objection," Mr. Chen said, rising smoothly. "The timeline of my client's evidence will show that Mr. Hayes began dissipating marital assets long before the date of separation, he claims. And we can prove it." He paused, letting the statement land. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call Ms. Jessica Monroe to the stand." A jolt went through the courtroom. Vance shot to his feet, objecting vehemently. But Judge Reed waved him down. her curiosity clearly piqued by the woman in fuchsia and the ostentatious handbag. "I'll allow it," the judge said, her voice firm. "Ms. Monroe, please approach the witness stand." Jessica looked momentarily surprised, then pleased. She clearly thought this was her moment to shine, to publicly legitimize her role in Richard's life. She sauntered to the stand, the Birkin swinging from her arm. She settled into the witness chair, crossed her legs, and placed the bag on the ledge in front of her, angled perfectly towards Caroline. The battle was about to commence, and the weapon of choice had just been placed into evidence. Jessica was sworn in her hand on the Bible, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. She was the center of attention, the star of the show. Mr. Chen approached the stand, his demeanor calm and methodical. "Ms. Monroe, thank you for joining us. We have already established through deposition that you have received numerous, shall we say, generous gifts from Mr. Hayes." "Richard is a very generous man," Jessica repeated her well-rehearsed line. "Indeed," Chen said, turning to the large screen on the courtroom wall. The Instagram photo of the Birkin flashed into view. "You identified this handbag during your deposition, and would I be correct in saying that is the very same bag you have brought with you into the courtroom today?" Jessica's smile widened. She patted the green alligator leather lovingly. "It is. It's my favorite." "I'm sure it is," Chen said. "And you stated its value is considerable. In excess of $150,000, is that correct?" "It's a limited edition," she said proudly. "A collector's item." Mr. Chen then projected a new image onto the screen, a credit card statement. It was a marital platinum card in both Richard and Caroline's names. He pointed to a highlighted line item. "This is a charge from the Hermes flagship store on Madison Avenue for $152,450. Can you see the date, Ms. Monroe?" Jessica squinted. "It looks like March 12th. "Correct. March 12th. Chen confirmed, turning to face the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes filed for divorce on June 20th. This purchase a single expenditure on a non-essential luxury item for his mistress was made more than 3 months prior to the official separation using marital funds. It is a textbook example of dissipation of marital assets." Vance was on his feet, objecting, but Judge Reed silenced him with a sharp wave of her hand. Her gaze was fixed on the bag, then on Jessica, her expression unreadable. Jessica, however, was unfazed. This was all part of the game. "It was a gift," she said with a shrug. "A birthday gift. Richard loves celebrating me." She directed the last part towards Caroline, a final petty jab. The courtroom was silent. Richard looked confident his lawyer seemed to be regrouping for a counter-argument. Jessica was beaming. She believed she had weathered the storm. The bag was hers, a gift, end of story. Then something unexpected happened. Judge Evelyn Reed, who had been listening intently, leaned forward in her high-backed chair. She removed her reading glasses, polishing them slowly with a cloth. She looked directly at Jessica, not as a judge to a witness, but as one woman appraising another. "Ms. Monroe." The judge said, her voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that cut through the tension. "That is indeed a beautiful handbag. An Hermes Birkin, 30 in Vercriquet alligator with palladium hardware. A very discerning choice." Jessica preened, glowing, under what she perceived as a compliment. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge continued, her eyes fixed on the bag. "As a collector of fine leather goods myself, I'm familiar with the craftsmanship involved. Could you please, for the court, do something for me?" "Of course," Jessica chirped, eager to please. Judge Reed's voice became sharp, precise. "Could you please open the bag and read the date stamp for me?" The air went out of Jessica Monroe. The color drained from her face, leaving her flawless makeup looking like a mask on a corpse. Her triumphant smile froze, then collapsed. I beg your pardon." "The date stamp," the judge repeated patiently, though a glint of steel had entered her eyes. "It is also known as a blind stamp. Every authentic Hermes bag has one pressed into the leather on the interior strap or panel. It's a single letter sometimes, in a shape indicating the year of manufacture. It is a fundamental mark of authenticity. Please open the bag and show the court's bailiff." Silence. A deep, profound silence fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on Jessica and the green handbag that suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Her manicured hands, which had been so confident moments before, trembled as she fumbled with the bag's iconic lock and clasp. She couldn't get it open. Her movements were frantic, clumsy. I don't usually. It's a bit tricky," she stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. She shot a desperate, panicked look at Richard, silently pleading for him to save her. But Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. "Is there a problem, Ms. Monroe?" Judge Reed pressed her voice devoid of sympathy. "It is a simple request. Just show us the stamp." Jessica's face crumpled. The arrogance, the confidence, the entire carefully constructed persona shattered into a million pieces right there on the witness stand. Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to send streams of black mascara down her pale cheeks. She couldn't answer the question. She couldn't show them the stamp. She couldn't do it because she knew, and Richard knew, and everyone in the courtroom was now beginning to realize there was no stamp to be found. The truth, when it came crashing down, was more pathetic and damning than Caroline could have ever imagined. Under Judge Reed's relentless, calm insistence, Jessica Monroe completely fell apart on the stand. Through a series of choked sobs and incoherent whispers, the story emerged. Richard Hayes, the master of the universe, had not bought his mistress a $150,000 handbag. He had bought her a counterfeit, a super fake, as she called it, purchased online for a few $1,000s from a shadowy website. The massive charge on the credit card, the one Carolyn and Mr. Chen had assumed was for the bag, was for something else entirely. It was for a block of untraceable bearer bonds, a classic old-school method of hiding assets. He had planned to report the card stolen after the purchase claimed the charge was fraudulent, and stash the bonds away, all while placating his mistress with a cheap imitation of the luxury she craved. He had lied to his wife to hide his affair, and he had lied to his mistress to hide his money. His deceit was pathological layered, and in the end stunningly stupid. The revelation sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Arthur Vance, Richard's lawyer, looked utterly poleaxed, his face ashen. He had built his entire defense around Richard's financial genius and post-separation spending. Now his client was exposed not just as an adulterer, but as a cheap, deceitful fraudster who had attempted to commit perjury and hide significant marital assets. Richard's credibility, the very foundation of his case, had been incinerated. Jessica's humiliation was absolute. The bag, her ultimate symbol of victory, the crown jewel of her new life, was a lie. It was a cheap knockoff, just like the life Richard had promised her. It meant the private jets were likely leased, the jewelry was probably cubic zirconia, and the love he professed was as fake as the alligator skin on her lap. She was not his queen. She was a bargain basement accessory. The judge dismissed her from the stand with a look of utter contempt. Jessica practically fled the courtroom, her sobs echoing in the hall. Judge Reed's ruling was swift and brutal. She spoke in a low, furious tone, her words directed squarely at Richard. Mr. Hayes, in my 15 years on this bench, I have seen a great deal of greed and dishonesty. But your calculated multi-layered deceit, your contempt for your wife, for your mistress, and for this court is truly in a class of its own." She awarded Caroline 70% of the total marital assets, including the full value of the hidden bearer bonds which she ordered him to surrender. She also awarded Caroline the Park Avenue penthouse, all of her investment portfolios and punitive legal fees. It was a judgment so decisively in Caroline's favor that it left Richard visibly shaking his face, pale and slack with shock. He hadn't just lost the case. He had been annihilated. Caroline left the courthouse alone. The grey sky had broken, and a sliver of watery sunlight was pushing through the clouds. As she descended the grand stone steps, she saw them. Richard and Jessica were standing on the sidewalk, engaged in a vicious, screaming argument. Jessica's perfect makeup was a ruined mess, her face contorted with rage and tears. Richard was jabbing a finger at her, his voice a furious snarl. Lying on the dirty pavement between them, discarded like a piece of trash, was the vibrant green handbag. It looked cheap and gaudy in the harsh light of day. Caroline paused for a moment, watching the ugly collapse of their beautiful lie. She felt no triumph, no surge of victory, only a quiet, profound sense of release. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, built from fake bags and fake promises. She didn't look back. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked down the street towards the rest of her life, a life of real value, a life that was authentically, completely, and finally her own. The months following the verdict were a study in demolition and reconstruction. While Richard and Jessica's world was being systematically dismantled by lawyers and liquidators, Caroline's was being quietly and deliberately rebuilt brick by authentic brick. Her first act of liberation was to sell the Park Avenue penthouse. She walked away from the marble floors and panoramic views without a backward glance, taking only her personal effects and the collection of modern art she had personally curated over the years. The sale was swift, the closing seamless. The apartment, once the epicenter of her gilded cage, was now just another entry on a balance sheet, a significant one which she immediately reinvested. She didn't buy another opulent showpiece. Instead, she purchased a historic brownstone in Greenwich Village, a place with creaking wooden floors, a small overgrown garden in the back, and rooms filled with the kind of warm afternoon light that felt like a blessing. For the first time in 16 years, she was surrounded, not by curated perfection, but by character and history. She spent her days in comfortable clothes, overseeing painters and carpenters, the scent of sawdust and fresh paint, replacing the cloying smell of Richard's lies. Her second act was to reclaim her professional identity. Armed with her considerable settlement and her flawless reputation for financial acumen, she opened a boutique consultancy she named Provenance Advisory. It was a niche firm bridging the worlds she knew best, art and finance. She advised a small select group of clients on investing in emerging artists, her sharp eye for talent matched only by her forensic approach to valuation and authenticity. Her office was the parlor floor of her brownstone. Her desk, a magnificent old library table set before a large window overlooking the leafy street. She worked for herself on her own terms, her success measured not in society column mentions, but in the thriving careers of the young artists she championed. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the divorce was finalized, Caroline was meeting with a new client, a tech entrepreneur looking to build a meaningful art collection. As she was explaining the importance of an artist's exhibition history, her phone buzzed with a news alert from a financial journal she followed. The headline was stark: Hayes Development Files for Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. She paused, tapping the link. The article detailed the spectacular collapse of Richard's empire. The court's judgment had been the first domino. The public nature of his financial fraud, the bearer bonds, the attempt to defraud the court, had spooked his investors, and credit lines dried up overnight. Business partners, fearing the taint of his disgrace, had pulled out of lucrative deals. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now worthless. The story of the Birkin fraud, as the tabloids had gleefully dubbed it, had become a cautionary tale whispered at every gala and charity benefit in the city. Richard Hayes was no longer a titan, he was a punchline. The article included a recent photograph of him leaving the bankruptcy court. He looked diminished, his expensive suit hanging on a frame that had lost its arrogant posture. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the pinched grey expression of a man who had lost everything and knew it was his own fault. Caroline stared at the photo for a long moment, feeling not a shred of satisfaction or pity, but a profound and final detachment. He was a stranger to her now, a character from a book she had finished reading long ago. "Is everything all right, Ms. Hayes?" her client asked, noticing her pause. Caroline looked up and smiled a genuine, untroubled smile. "Everything is perfect," she said, switching her phone to silent and placing it face down on the table. "Now let me tell you about a brilliant young painter I found in Brooklyn." Richard's descent was far faster and more brutal than he could have ever imagined. He was forced to sell the company for pennies on the dollar to a competitor who immediately scrubbed his name from its branding. He lost the Hamptons beach house, the fleet of cars, the private jet membership. He was a social leper. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The invitations stopped. He was forced to move into a generic rented condominium in a high-rise in New Jersey, a place with thin walls and a view of a parking garage. His true punishment, however, was the silence. He had spent his life surrounded by the noise of his own importance, the ringing phones, the fawning assistants, the clamour of admiring colleagues. Caroline had managed the quiet parts of his life so seamlessly that he had never noticed the buffer she provided against true loneliness. Now the silence in his new apartment was deafening. There was no one to schedule his appointments, no one to plan his meals, no one to buffer him from the crushing weight of his own failure. He had tried to cling to Jessica in the immediate aftermath, but their bond forged in luxury and deceit shattered on the courthouse steps. Their screaming match had been the end. She blamed him for her public humiliation, for the fake bag that had made her a laughingstock. He blamed her for her greed and stupidity, for flaunting the bag and walking into Chen's obvious trap. She left him that day, and within a week she was evicted from the Tribeca apartment, its contents seized to be assessed as part of the marital estate. Jessica Monroe's fall was in its own way even more poetic. She had no money, no career, and a reputation that was now toxic in the very circles she desperately needed to access. Her name was synonymous with fake. She tried to leverage her brief notoriety, reaching out to reality TV producers, but they dismissed her as a one-note villain with no staying power. She tried to reignite her styling career, but no one would hire the woman who couldn't spot a counterfeit Birkin. Her Instagram account, once a shrine to her lavish life, became a bitter, sparsely updated feed of old photos, a digital ghost of a life she no longer lived. Eventually, she was forced to sell off what little she had, left the few authentic designer items Richard had bought her in the beginning, now sold for a fraction of their value to consignment shops. About 2 years after the divorce, a young artist Caroline was representing had her first solo gallery show in Chelsea. The opening was a massive success, the gallery buzzing with collectors, critics, and the vibrant energy of the New York art scene. Caroline moved through the crowd, not as a +1, but as a respected professional, her name spoken with admiration. She was deep in conversation with a critic from the Times when she felt a familiar, cloying scent of gardenias. She turned slightly. Standing near the bar, holding a tray of cheap champagne flutes, was a waitress. Her uniform was ill-fitting, her hair was pulled back in a severe, unflattering bun, and her face, under the harsh gallery lights, looked tired and etched with a bitterness that no amount of makeup could hide. It was Jessica Munro. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. Caroline saw a flicker of recognition in Jessica's eyes, immediately followed by a wave of raw, burning humiliation. She turned away quickly, her back rigid, and hurried toward the kitchen. In that moment, Caroline understood the final, brutal irony of it all. Here, Jessica was a paid servant at an event celebrating authentic creation, an event made possible by the very woman she had tried so desperately to destroy. She was surrounded by objects of immense value, yet she owned nothing. She had chased a life of perceived luxury, only to end up serving it to others. Caroline felt a sudden, unexpected pang, not of pity, but of a sad, clinical clarity. Jessica had never been her enemy. She was a symptom of the disease of superficiality and transactional relationships that had infected her marriage. Richard had chosen Jessica not because she was better, but because she was easier. She was a hollow vessel he could fill with expensive things, a mirror that reflected back the powerful, generous man he wanted to be, without ever demanding the truth of who he was. Later that evening, as the last of the guests departed, Caroline stood alone in the quiet gallery, looking at a large, abstract canvas that was the centerpiece of the show. It was a chaotic swirl of deep blues, blacks, and grays, but at its very center was a single defiant slash of brilliant, luminous gold. It was a painting about emerging from darkness, about finding light in the wreckage. A collector had purchased it earlier that night for a sum that would ensure the young artist could paint without worry for the next 5 years. Caroline smiled. The ledger was finally balanced. All debts had been paid. All assets, real and imagined, had been accounted for. Richard was in a prison of his own making. Jessica was trapped in a life she disdained. And she, Caroline Hayes, was finally truly authentically free. The quiet, composed woman who had once managed the accounts of a gilded cage was now the proprietor of her own priceless life, a masterpiece of her own making. And so Caroline walked away, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who knew her own worth all along. Her story isn't just about a courtroom drama. It's a powerful reminder that true value isn't something you can wear on your arm or flaunt on social media. It's the quiet dignity, the sharp intellect, and the unbreakable resilience that lives within. While others chase the illusion of luxury, she proved that authenticity is the only asset that truly matters. If Caroline's journey from betrayal to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of quiet strength over loud deception, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed the story. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And most importantly, subscribe for more real-life stories of justice and empowerment. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for listening.